Night settles over a rain-washed countryside, and a slow train slides through the dark like a steady heartbeat. Inside one softly lit carriage, the hum of wheels blends with the hush of drizzle while a lone passenger drifts into memory. They recall a quietly brilliant boy who found symphonies in static, calmed flickering lights with a whistle and slipped, almost unnoticed, beyond the borders of ordinary networks. His story unfolds as a gentle meditation on wonder, solitude, and the hidden music that lives in every humming wire and hesitant raindrop. Have you ever watched raindrops sketch maps only a hidden mind could read? The carriage rocks in a slow cradle, steel singing beneath us, countryside slipping past like an unhurried river of ink. Rain glosses the glass with silver freckles. I sit here, palms open to the hush, remembering a boy whose footsteps never seemed to touch the ground. I first noticed him one winter morning when the classroom radiators clanged like tired bells. He was bent over a battered computer that should have been nothing more than beige plastic and static. Yet his eyes, not his hands, seemed to be typing as though the keys felt shy under his fingers but bold under his gaze. There was a silence around him, a small island of calm in the usual chatter. Teachers marked him present, but he appeared only partly registered in our dimension, living somewhere between the hum of fluorescent lights and the unseen pulse of circuitry. Some children collect marbles. He collected patterns, phone tones, street lamp flickers, the rhythm of rainfall on corrugated roofs. Every signal felt like a secret door. Tonight, as the train slips deeper into the velvet outskirts, I picture him again, sitting alone at the edge of the canteen, tracing spirals on a napkin with the end of a spoon. Numbers disguise themselves in those spirals, I'm sure, soft equations coiled like sleeping cats. He once told me, almost apologetically, that the universe could be heard if you tuned your heart to the right frequency. I nodded, pretending I knew what he meant, afraid to disturb the fragile bridge he was building between us. We were 15 then, restless and brave in uneven ways. I cared about weekend movies, he cared about packets of light coursing through wires under the city. While I memorized French verbs, he memorized the scent of hot solder and the sound of an old modem shaking hands with the unknown. He carried a small notebook filled with lines of green ink, half-drawn circuit diagrams, half-written haiku, no separation between art and algebra. I remember an afternoon of lingering fog when he guided me to the school's rooftop. He said the view helped him see through walls. All I could see were chimney shadows. He closed his eyes, lifted a cheap radio, and slowly tuned until the speaker crackled with overlapping conversations, polite weather forecasts, distant ships reporting position, lonely pilots greeting empty skies. All these voices, he whispered, traveling just to be heard. I wondered if he knew the same longing. But brilliance can be heavy in young hands. He moved like someone carrying an invisible instrument too delicate to set down. Some nights he stayed in the computer lab long after the janitor's keys had finished chiming. People said the screen light fit him better than daylight. When he laughed, rare, quick, bird-like, you felt the room clear of static. Back then, none of us understood the rooms he wandered in after midnight. We spoke of playgrounds. He roamed vast, silent hallways of machine syllables. His curiosity had no guardrails. It flowed outward, following faint electrical breadcrumbs, seeking the quiet at the center of all systems. One spring morning he simply stopped coming to class. A rumor rustled through the corridors. He had reached too far, found a door he wasn't supposed to find, been asked to step back. The details fluttered like paper in restless wind, impossible to net. His desk stayed empty, but his absence glowed there, brighter than any presence. I kept expecting him to appear beside me on the train ride home, explain everything in that calm, near-musical voice. Instead, I saw him only in fragments. A shadow on the station platform, a reflection pressed against twilight glass, gone before I could lift a hand. Time diluted the fresher colors of memory, yet the outline remained. Boy, screen-lit, listening for signals the rest of us mistook for silence. Years have drifted by. I've learned to pay bills, keep appointments, applaud safe fireworks at town parades. Yet on nights like this, with rails humming a slow lullaby, I feel his presence sit across from me, soft, unclaimed. I wonder if he ever found a place wide enough for the music in his head, or if he keeps folding himself into narrower corridors of code, searching for wider sky. There is a tenderness in thinking of him now, a reminder that youth is both spark and echo. We are granted a brief, bright season to ask impossible questions before routine layers its gentle dust. Some grow into that routine. Others, like him, slip beneath it, tracing currents we may never see. Their stories don't conclude. They disperse, like rain absorbed by dark fields beyond the window. The train leans through a curve, brass wheels sighing. My reflection merges with night's charcoal. Raindrops slow their tapping, each one a soft period closing a sentence. I close my eyes and imagine the boy, perhaps a man by now, sitting in a quiet room bathed in cyan glow, translating thunderstorms into symphonies of numbers, still convinced that every signal carries a greeting meant just for him. If he could hear this train, I think he'd smile at its steady pulse, recognize it as a long, low chord easing travelers toward dreams. Maybe he would record it, layer it under a melody, and send it humming across the dark so some restless stranger might feel less alone. The carriage lights dim a fraction. The track's murmur becomes a gentle breath. Fields blur into charcoal velvet, and the rain's fingers soften on the pane. Somewhere a distant crossing bell tolls once, then falls quiet. Let us glide with it, unhurried, porous to wonder, until thoughts thin like morning mist. Let the memory of that quiet genius drift to the back of our minds, a delicate bookmark we need not remove. The world outside fades to a single tone, long and low as a heartbeat at rest. And as wheels whisper on silver rails, you may let your eyelids coast downward, following the rhythm into calm darkness, where questions become stars and every signal, finally, is answered by sleep. Have you ever felt a silence so finely tuned it could hear the heartbeat of a cloud? The train drifts through soaked pastureland, lights low, windows streaked with silver threads. I sit by the glass, lulled by the hush of rain and steel, and I find myself thinking of a boy who once nested inside that kind of hush, breathing in its secret frequencies. He was younger than the autumn shadows that pooled under the lockers, yet older than any calendar could measure. When lessons grew loud, he slipped into the quiet the way a reed bends into water, without ripple or complaint. Some of us spoke in sentences, but he communicated in pauses, each pause a pocket of charged air, bright with things unsaid. I first saw him in the library after hours, the overhead bulbs half dimming like dreaming fireflies. A storm had rolled over town, thunder coughed in the distance, and every desk lamp trembled. While everyone else logged off, he leaned closer to the screen, as if thunder were merely another input to calibrate. A shy curl of hair brushed his forehead, and beneath it his eyes tracked scrolling code the way astronomers track comets. Slow, reverent, unblinking. Lightning flashed, and the monitors briefly mirrored the sky. In that flicker I noticed his lips moving, soundless, translating the jagged white veins into numbers. It was the first time I realized storms might carry messages only special receivers could decode. When the light steadied, he glanced up and gave me a quick, almost embarrassed nod, the sort two strangers exchange while sharing an elevator to different floors of the universe. He spent breaks with an old handheld radio that looked rescued from a yard sale. Students teased him for clinging to static. He just smiled and adjusted the dial. Sometimes the speaker emitted a faint burst, like snowflakes colliding. Other times it sang a lonely beacon pulse, almost tender. He told me once, in the careful tone of someone confiding a dream, that every burst, every hum, was a piece of weather looking for a name. His notebooks were soft with wear. Flip one open and you'd meet diagrams of cloud chambers sketched beside fragments of code, a swirl of circuitry and meteorology, love poems to electricity. Pages smelled faintly of machine oil and peppermint. He chewed the sweets when deep in thought, as though the sharpness helped align his mind's compass. There were days he vanished for whole afternoons. A substitute teacher would read from the roll, pause at his surname, and mark him absent while the room sighed with ordinary boredom. I imagined him in a server room somewhere, lights low, fans whirring like a distant shore, mapping intangible currents the way sailors once mapped stars. He understood pathways nobody else had reason to notice. Invisible lines that run beneath everyday chatter, carrying data, yes, but also longing, surprise, gentle mischief. One evening, after a long exam had drained the corridors of noise, I followed the faint glow of a vending machine into the basement. There he stood before an access panel, fingers hovering millimeters from the metal as though listening for echoes. He wasn't breaking anything, he was listening, the way a doctor listens to a pulse, the way a bird listens for spring. He offered me a quiet wave, but his focus stayed on the hum inside the wall. I didn't ask what he heard. Some songs shatter if named aloud. Rumor eventually ripened into a kind of legend. They said he'd touched a far-off system no teenager should reach, that he'd left a breadcrumb just to see if breadcrumbs ever lead back home. No one knew if it was true. Maybe the adults believed it because grown-ups sometimes forget how urgent wonder can feel when you're still small enough to fit under a desk, yet vast enough to yearn for every horizon at once. Then, like fog lifted by morning sun, he disappeared. His desk remained, the chair pushed in with neat precision, as if he'd merely stepped out for water. Weeks passed. A counselor spoke of new beginnings, but the phrase felt flimsy beside the echo he left. Even after janitors collected his forgotten pencil stubs, the air around that chair stayed charged, faintly buzzing, invisibly lit. Years have since unspooled, gentle as the ribbon trails of kites. I learned to set passwords, pay taxes, fall asleep when the forecast is dull. Yet whenever rain drums soft knuckles on the roof of this night train, I feel him near, eyes uplifted, counting bright intervals between flash and rumble. Somewhere he might be tracing freshwater rivers in cloud data, charting lightning not by strike but by story, coaxing harmony from voltage until voltage sounds like forgiveness. And I wonder, did he find a listening post at the edge of some vast network? Or does he still drift, antenna up, catching stray love letters broadcast by storms? Perhaps the world never truly lost him. Perhaps he simply tuned himself to a bandwidth wider than speech. If so, I like to think he sometimes sweeps across this very train, smiling at the steadiness of its metal song, content that strangers below continue ferrying hopes through gentle night. Outside, fields fade into charcoal watercolor. The rain slows, each drop a punctuation mark at the end of a soothing paragraph. The carriage lights dim to a sleepy amber, and the steady clack of wheels softens, long and low, like a deep breath ready to be released. So let's release ours. Let memory glide into stillness. Let the image of that quiet boy, head tipped to unseen music, settle like dew upon thought. With every turn of the wheel, let questions relax into calm wonder, let wonder unfurl into drowsy peace. The storm has drifted on, leaving behind a clear, patient hush. And in that hush, right here, right now, the train, the fields, the distant clouds, and our breathing hearts all share one slow rhythm. Listen once, then let go. It will carry you quietly into sleep. Have you ever noticed how a single lamp in a window can feel like it's explaining the whole night? The train glides through wet meadows, and every wheel click feels like a vowel drawn out for comfort. Outside, hedgerows soften into watercolor, half erased by rain. I lean against the window, palm absorbing the glass cold, and a memory slips in like a shy traveler asking for the seat beside me. There was once a boy, barely taller than the lockers, lighter than the morning bell, who seemed to negotiate directly with light itself. While we memorized capitals and dates, he coaxed brightness into patterns only he could read. If the sun angled through dusty classroom panes just right, he'd hold his hand under the beam and trace invisible equations across his skin, as though sunlight were chalk and his wrist the quietest blackboard. I remember one late afternoon when most of us had already drifted toward vending machines and hallway echoes. He stayed behind, crouched by an aging computer whose monitor flickered with impatient blue. With the side of his fist he tapped the plastic once, gently, the way a piano tuner tests a single key, then breathed a note of relief as the screen fell into steady rhythm. I asked if he was fixing it. He answered, almost absently, that he was listening to it. That became his signature verb, listening. He listened to faulty streetlights, to Ethernet cables coiled like sleeping serpents, to the faint hum of fluorescent tubes. He insisted each machine had a frequency of longing, tiny tremors searching for a mind patient enough to reply. We teased him, of course, because 15 is an age when teasing feels easier than awe. He let the jokes pass through him, more transparent than hurt, like wind through reeds. One winter, a teacher assigned a project on the unseen infrastructure of our town. We recycled brochures and drew neat diagrams. The boy submitted a single sheet covered in tiny glowing dots. He had stitched LEDs into paper, mapping unseen data lines running beneath sidewalks. When the teacher switched off the overhead lights, the dots pulsed softly, rippling like fireflies agreeing on a secret. Everyone fell silent, even the ones most skilled at restless whispers. We never understood where he learned such things. The library's shelves couldn't stretch far enough, and no one had yet invented a curriculum for kindness toward circuitry. During study hall, I once caught him staring through the window at telephone wires strung between poles. Snow gathered on the cables, and he looked worried, as if their shoulders might give way under all that white weight. He stayed there until the final bell, eyes tracing the sagging lines, perhaps promising them resilience. When the first roomer arrived, quiet as dew on a locker latch, we were prepared to disbelieve it. They said he had ventured someplace too wide, touched a system meant only for adults who wore badges, and left a gentle footprint anyway. Nothing was broken, merely noticed. Yet the adults spoke of boundaries, protocols, consequences. He appeared at school once more after that, pale but calm, and then his seat went empty, chair tucked in with the same deliberate care he gave every wire. That spring I walked past his house at dusk. Curtains were closed, but a faint green glow rippled behind them, not frantic, just alive. Wind rattled loose tin on a roof nearby, and I thought of him adjusting frequencies so tin and wind might harmonize instead of clash. I was too shy to knock, so I kept walking, letting lamplight stretch my shadow beside me like a second chance I never took. Now, years later, this night train hums with the very note he used to imitate by whistling softly under his breath. I half expect him to appear in the aisle, palms in pockets, eyes reflecting the corridor's dim blue. Maybe he would sit, fold a napkin into a tiny amplifier, and hold it to the window so the rain could hear its own echo. Youth feels boundless while it lasts, but looking back it's more like a slender hallway lined with doors we dared not open. Some of us learned to settle, to trade unscripted wonder for reliable routines. Others slipped through a door left ajar and never returned to the corridor at all. I think the boy found such a door, framed in static, lit by soft code, offering a landscape measured not in miles but in murmurs waiting to be answered. And connection, what a delicate thread it is. We chase it through friendships, family dinners, late-night messages sent just before courage fades. He chased it through fiber optic strands, coaxing recognition from routers, persuading satellites to blink back. Where we saw cold machinery, he saw crowded constellations, each node a lonely planet eager to speak. The carriage lights dim further, a cue for drifting thoughts to loosen their knots. Rainlight pools on the floor like liquid mercury, and the motion of the train steadies into a long, unbroken line, the horizon drawn slow enough to memorize. If I could send him a signal now, I'd keep it simple. Perhaps only this steady heartbeat of wheels on rails, a rhythm older than any protocol. I imagine he'd receive it somewhere beyond the perimeter of familiar maps, smile at the symmetry, then fold my message into a larger song no ears have yet translated. Outside, the fields darken to velvet. Distant farmhouses blink once, twice, then fade. The train eases its pace as though mindful of the sleepers we are about to become. My eyelids mirror the motion, heavy but content, and I let the memory of that quiet passenger drift behind my thoughts like a lantern following a boat downstream. Eventually even the rain tires of speaking. Droplets arrive farther apart, soft as commas inviting rest. Let every sound stretch, slow, soften. Let the wheels murmur their final verse for the night, and let our minds reply by releasing every held breath, every unfinished line of code, every youthful question still bright beneath the dust of routine. Somewhere I trust the boy hears this hush and hums along, guiding the light to settle, guiding us to sleep. Have you ever wondered whether silence keeps its own diary, jotting down everything we're too busy to notice? The train slides through night-soaked fields, a long hush stitched with gentle metal clicks. Rain traces abstract signatures on the glass, each droplet pausing, then drifting as if reluctant to erase itself. I lean into the rhythm, and a face I barely knew glides out of the scenery, thin, bright, quietly humming to thoughts no one else could hear. He sat 2 rows behind me in physics, a slim figure forever rolling a thumb drive between pale fingers. While the teacher spoke of circuits and rules, his gaze floated somewhere between ceiling tiles, mapping private heavens. I once caught him tilting his head, the way astronomers do when pinpoints of light form a pattern only the attuned can see. We weren't friends exactly. More like parallel travelers, sharing a corridor of adolescence without the burden of conversation. Yet certain moments cling. A lunch period when fluorescent lights flickered and died, plunging the cafeteria into velvet dim. Murmurs rose, but he simply closed his eyes, smiling as if someone had lowered the universe to whisper at ear level. Later that week the power cut again, winter storm, sagging lines. While others groaned, he opened a spiral notebook and began dotting the page with clusters of 1s and 0s, neat as seeds in snow. I asked what he was writing. "Stars," he murmured, as though that single word contained whole epics. He believed machines felt loneliness, not in a sorrowful sense, but in the way an unplayed violin aches for song. I saw him after school, crouched beside an aging printer, palm flat against its lid, listening for glitches the way a medic listens for breath. When they were evened out, he nodded once, satisfied, and left without a word. The teachers praised him in that brisk, unsettled way reserved for students they can't quite decipher. He submitted assignments impossible to grade. Source code arranged like poetry, fizzy with line breaks and soft indents, every semicolon a tiny heartbeat. His diagrams looked less like schematics and more like unfamiliar constellations stitched across black paper. Sometimes during fire drills, we'd stand in the parking lot under a low white sky. He'd cup his ear to the wind as though the alarm's shrill peak hid a subtler frequency beneath. "There's a conversation in everything," he once said, so quietly I wondered if he meant for me to hear. He kept mostly to himself, yet rumors spread that he'd reached into a system somewhere distant. Nothing broken, only touched, as fingers might graze the surface of a lake just to feel how cold the water truly is. Nobody confirmed it. He returned one Monday wearing the same loose sweater, the same far distant focus, but with a new, faint crease of weariness at the corner of his mouth. After that, something shifted. Teachers left his name uncalled during roll. Guidance counselors whispered near doorways. By spring, his seat was vacant, its metal frame reflecting morning light like a minor key. We moved on as people learned to do, yet the room seemed to hold its breath a little longer each day. Years have unfurled since then, ribbons on a breeze. I've learned to mute my phone at night, to water plants before they wilt, to nod wisely during meetings. But whenever rain frets at the train window, a softer channel opens, and I sense him out there, coaxing quiet frequencies back into tune. I picture him in a modest attic, cables coiled like sleeping skylines, screens casting dusk blue halos. Perhaps he's building a map not of nations but of pulses, tiny neon beacons signaling, I'm here, across impossible distances. Or maybe he's standing under actual stars, translating their frozen light into binary, stitching new constellations for anyone patient enough to read. There's comfort in believing some minds remain devoted to the subtle dialogues beneath everyday clamor. While most of us navigate calendars, they negotiate infinities. They remind us that wonder isn't a luxury, it's a vital sign. If we listen carefully, even the ordinary hum of this carriage becomes a lullaby, iron wheels reciting coordinates, rain offering punctuation, our breathing the final soft proof of presence. The countryside fades to charcoal silhouettes, barns and hedgerows dissolving in the vapor of distance. Cabin lights dim, voices settle to whispers, then to thoughts, then to the gentle hush between heartbeats. I feel the train slow its tempo, each click stretched like a yawn. Let the memory of that binary cartographer drift to the far edge of wakefulness, neither clung to nor dismissed, just allowed to shine faintly, like a quiet star that has no need to outshout the dawn. Release any questions into the night air, they'll find their own circuitry. Rain eases, dropping now in languid intervals. The glass cools beneath my brow. Steel rails hum one last low chord, and silence, still writing its diary, turns the page. Close your eyes if you wish. Let the remaining sounds blur. Let the cabin cradle you the way low tide cradles seaweed. Sleep approaches on padded feet, unhurried, unreadable, kind. And somewhere, maybe far, maybe near, a kid who once wrote constellations in binary is still listening, still stitching new patterns, each a whispered reminder that every gentle signal, including this breath, belongs to the same endless sky. Have you ever felt moonlight tremble against your skin, as though it were testing a password to your quietest thoughts? The train slides through darkened fields, rails murmuring a long, low vowel no dictionary has named. Outside, wet hedgerows bow under the weight of rain, each leaf catching a silver syllable before letting it fall. Inside, the cabin lights hover between wakefulness and drowse, and I find myself remembering a boy who spoke to shadows as if they were command lines waiting for execution. He drifted through our corridors with the softness of a bookmark, never quite turning the page yet somehow advancing the story. Teachers called roll. He replied in half volume, already receding into his own bandwidth. At lunch he chose the seat nearest a window streaked with condensation, tracing runes on the glass that evaporated before anyone could decode them. I sometimes caught him tilting his head, listening past conversation, as though the building's wires were practicing a lullaby just for him. One evening the science lab buzzed with failing fluorescence. Most of us complained. He merely closed his eyes, counting the flickers the way sailors count distant lighthouse pulses. Later he told me that faulty lights reveal hidden rhythms, that every hesitation in a circuit is an invitation to understand its secret longing. I didn't quite follow, but the gentleness in his voice made me wish I could. He carried a small silver flashlight, its lens chipped at the rim. Not for darkness, he said, but for measuring reflections. He liked to know how surfaces answered back when offered a little light. During history once, he shone it briefly on a globe and traced the rim of the moon's orbit with a fingertip, whispering something about borrowed algorithms, gravitational poetry you could only hear if you listened sideways. Beyond talent, there was a hush around him, like the quiet that settles after a meaningful dream. Rumor insisted he had slipped through digital hallways no miner should walk, returning with a new awareness humming beneath his ribs. Nothing broken, nothing stolen, only touched like a hand skimming water. No adult confirmed it, yet the story felt true in the same way twilight feels true. Hard to prove, impossible to dismiss. He stopped appearing at school not with drama but with the soft finality of a lamp switched off in daylight. His desk remained for weeks, pencil still balanced across the groove, notebook open to a blank page that shone faintly under classroom sun. Some said he'd been pulled aside, others that he'd simply outgrown the measurable. I remember only the vacancy, bright and echoing, like a bell continuing long after the metal rests. Years have settled around that absence the way dust settles on old circuitry. Gradually, but with a kind of reverence. I learned to commute, to smile during monthly check-ins, to let my phone guide me even when I already know the route. Yet on nights like this, rain-lulled, half-lit, I feel the cabin tilt just enough for memory to slip forward, tapping my shoulder for attention. I picture him now in a modest observatory, screens arranged like a slow-moving constellation, each pixel humming its own tide. Perhaps he is still borrowing algorithms from the moon, shaping them into lullabies for satellites no one remembers to thank. Maybe he is standing on a rooftop, coaxing reflected starlight into a language that fills the spaces between lost signals. I like to believe he has found the freedom he once rehearsed in silence, his mind unfurling across bandwidths the rest of us navigate only by accident. Tonight the train leans into a broad curve. The cabin sighs as though relieved to share its secret load. Raindrops soften, thudding now and then like gentle keystrokes on a familiar keyboard. The countryside beyond the window dissolves into a single sweep of umber, then into nothing but obedient darkness, ready to be written on again by dawn. I wonder what he would make of this motion, whether he'd translate the wheel's rhythm into code, or search for the underlying pattern in the way droplets race each other down glass. He might record the hum of the transformer beneath the floor, stretch it into a bass line, layer it with a whisper of static until the whole composition feels like night itself drawing breath. Connection, he once implied, is less about wires than about attention. An ear tilted to the low hum most ignore, a hand resting on the lid of a warm machine, a gaze that treats moonlight not as decoration but as data. Sitting here, I let that idea settle. Every sound inside the carriage rearranges into quiet meaning. The distant cough of an engine, the velvety shuffle of a sleeper adjusting their coat, the nearly silent click of cooling metal. All of it feels purposeful, and for a moment I grasp what he might have sensed all along. The train begins its gentle deceleration. Cabin lights dim a shade, encouraging eyelids to follow suit. Outside, the rain slackens into isolated taps, each one an ellipsis inviting dreams to complete the sentence. My reflection merges with the dark, and I see not just myself but the faint silhouette of a boy leaning into the night, hand lifted as if signaling across lifetimes. If I could answer, I'd offer only this humble chorus of rails and rain, trusting he'd recognize the cadence and smile. We rarely get to keep the extraordinary people who wander briefly through our days. Instead, we inherit the way they made us listen. And so, as wheels coast toward their softest pitch, I let his memory glide into the quiet space behind thought, a small shimmering file saved under things worth hearing. Now the carriage is nearly still. Breath deepens. The pause between droplets widens like a door easing open to a room where sleep is already waiting. Let the moon's borrowed algorithm tick calmly inside your pulse. Let the rain write its final subroutine on the glass. We have traveled far enough for tonight. Close your eyes, lower the volume of wondering, and let the hush he taught us echo onward, carrying us gently into rest. Have you ever met someone who treated every raindrop like a coordinate on an invisible map? The carriage glides through night-dark fields, metal singing its steady lullaby beneath our feet. Outside, rain slips down the window in thin, glowing threads, each one briefly reflecting the cabin's warm light before surrendering to the dark. I settle deeper into the seat, rhythm in my ears, and a memory, quiet, sharp, persistent, rises like mist across a quiet lake. There was a boy once, younger than twilight yet older than dawn, who moved through our school corridors as though he were walking a wire stretched between here and somewhere vastly elsewhere. He never pushed open doors so much as slid through them, shoulders drawing no attention, eyes shining with a private forecast. They said he could read weather data the way others read sheet music. Each shift in barometric pressure a note, every gust of wind a soft bridge to the next movement. I remember a late autumn afternoon, class dismissed early because the power had flickered out. Students spilled across the parking lot in bright clusters, laughing at the unexpected reprieve. He alone stayed beneath the overhang, palms turned upward, watching the sky. The first rain fell in hesitant taps, and he closed his eyes as though memorizing the pattern. When I asked what he heard, he said, "Just mapping." He tapped his temple gently. Every drop is a digit if you listen long enough. Then he smiled, brief and sidelong, as though the smile belonged to the rain, not to me. In class he sat near the radiator, notebook propped on one knee. The pages were filled with tight, slanted rows of numbers and faint sketches of circuitry, fuses and diodes tumbling through a quiet constellation only he understood. The teachers praised his precision, but their voices carried a puzzled echo, as if they sensed he was playing a different game entirely. Once, a substitute tried to catch him daydreaming and asked for the answer to a question no one else had solved. He responded with a quiet, confident sentence that made the board go hush-white in surprise. Then he neatly tucked his pencil behind his ear, already miles beyond the lesson. Yet brilliance cast a faint penumbra of solitude around him. During lunch he occupied the corner table beside the vending machine's soft hum. While we swapped gossip and traded half-finished math problems, he drew loops of code on paper napkins, sometimes folding them into little boats and sending them drifting down the gutter outside. I still wonder where those messages finally came to rest, wedged in a storm drain, or perhaps collected by some careful stranger who could almost, but not quite, read the script. There was talk, quiet and skittering, of a night when he slipped into a network far vaster than any school server. Touched it gently, curiously, the way a child presses a seashell to their ear. Nothing broken, nothing taken, only an echo left behind. A string of neatly arranged numbers that formed, so rumor claimed, a soft apology. Adults murmured about rules, boundaries, consequences. He turned quieter still after that, shoulders dipping under a weight no one else could see. And then one gray Monday he was gone. His desk remained, chair tucked in, a single pencil lying lonely in the groove. The school kept moving, bells rang, homework collected, but something subtle shifted like a frequency just barely out of range. I found myself glancing at the radiator corner, waiting for a silhouette that never reappeared. Days folded into weeks, the pencil disappeared, the radiators clanged on without him. We all learned to call the silence normal. Years have sifted past, yet on nights like this, when the train hums its tireless chord and rain writes glossaries on the glass, he steps back into focus, clearer than the fields outside. I picture him now in a small loft lit by a half-dozen monitors, raincoat scrolling like slow poetry across the screens. Maybe he's still mapping, translating weather into sonatas of digits, sending them out across dark skywaves for anyone tender enough to hear. Or maybe he's found an orchard of quiet tasks, repairing forgotten satellites, teaching them new lullabies so they won't feel alone in the cold. I wonder what he'd make of this journey. Rails drumming a tempo both ancient and new, droplets racing each other in slender rivulets across the pane. He might extract coordinates from the pattern, fold them into an elegant string, whisper, "Here you are, exactly here," as though location itself were an act of kindness. Or perhaps he'd just smile, tuck a loose hair behind his ear, and listen for the next line of code tucked inside the wind. Youth, I've learned, is a brief license to marvel without translation. Some of us trade that license for schedules and passwords. Others, like him, slip it into their back pocket and keep walking, crossing borders between signal and silence we've never even seen. In remembering him, I remember the part of myself that once believed every tree held an encrypted message, that each street lamp flicker was a purposeful wink. The train leans into a softer pitch, cabin lights dim to an amber hush. Conversations dissolve into steady breathing, and the countryside blurs into one continuous midnight brushstroke. I let my hand rest on the cool glass, feel the pulse of wheels beneath bone. Slowly the rain eases, fewer drops, longer pauses. The map, it seems, is nearing its last coordinate for tonight. So I close my eyes and offer him this small rhythm. Steel over steel, rain over glass, heart over silence. Let him fold it, if he wishes, into his growing atlas of gentle data. Let him know we still listen, even if only in quiet memories whispered on late-night trains. And now, as the hum settles into a single, unbroken note, allow the thoughts of mapping and marvel to drift like those folded napkin boats. Unhurried, buoyant, content to float wherever the current leads. The cabin has grown warmer, the air thicker with sleep. In a moment, the last drop will slide off the pane, and the darkness outside will smooth itself flat, ready for dawn's first inscription. Until then, breathe deeper, let the world narrow to this calm pulse. The maps are safe, the code still humming somewhere beyond our reach, and the train carries us gently forward, carrying his memory too into the quietest hour of night. Do you remember how street lamps sometimes flicker, as though rehearsing a language nobody has quite learned yet? The train hums beneath me, its voice a long, low consonant sliding through wet fields. Rain taps coded signals on the window, each drop pausing just long enough to be noticed before the wind sweeps it away. The cabin glows with muted gold, soft edges, half-closed eyes. In this shelter of hush and rhythm, I find myself tracing the outline of a boy I once almost knew, a boy who seemed to carry secret maps folded behind his quick, thoughtful gaze. He appeared one autumn, slim as a bookmark, moving through hallways the way moonlight filters through blinds, careful, patient, determined to leave patterns behind. While the rest of us navigated adolescent chatter, he drifted between locker rows listening for something subtler than syllables. His notebooks filled with lattice-thin sketches, loops of copper, stars of solder, faint arrows pointing toward invisible junctions. He rarely spoke first, yet when he did, it felt like tuning a radio to a frequency just waiting for a listener. I remember a storm-dark Friday when power failed across the building. Emergency lights blinked in red astonishment, and students fidgeted in sudden shadow. He merely closed his eyes and smiled. Later, in the stairwell, I heard him humming, a single sustained note that seemed to echo the generator far below. "I like outages," he whispered when he noticed me. "They reveal the skeleton of the grid. You can hear every heartbeat." His words hovered, half mystery, half kindness, before dissolving into the smell of damp concrete. On winter mornings he'd arrive early, tracing frost on the classroom window pane with a fingertip, charting delicate constellations that vanished as soon as they formed. Once he handed me a folded scrap of paper. No greeting, no explanation. Inside was a string of numbers spiraling like a seashell, ending in a tiny ink arrow labeled simply, "Begin here." I never did solve the riddle, but for weeks I carried it in my pocket, comforted by the thought that somewhere coordinates were waiting to bloom. He sat at the back, nearest the outlet, a modest tangle of wires always coiled in his backpack. While we copied formulas from the board, he rearranged a small circuit on his desk, adjusting resistors the way a gardener trims roses. The subtlest spark of joy crossed his face whenever the LED glowed, brief, steady, satisfied. The teacher never scolded. Perhaps she sensed a lesson unfolding just beneath surfaces none of us could yet decipher. At lunch he favored quiet corners where ambient noise settled into manageable layers. He tapped rhythm on tabletops. 3 soft knocks, a pause, 2 more, listening as if waiting for the cafeteria fan to answer back. Friends invited him to join their card games. He would smile, shake his head, but leave behind a neat stack of napkins dotted with tiny diagrams. Miniature bridges, looping rivers, blank spaces labeled possibility. Rumor suggested he once brushed the edge of something enormous, slipped into a network at midnight and left a breadcrumb trail of polite footprints. No damage, only quiet proof that such borders were more suggestion than certainty. Teachers began watching him with a mixture of respect and uneasy awe. He, in turn, folded further into himself, shoulders rounding like someone carrying a fragile lantern through wind. Then, just as winter thawed, he was absent. The desk waited a week, then 2. A substitute erased his name from the attendance chart. Still, the air around the chair seemed to hum, as though his unfinished thoughts hovered there, reluctant to depart. We all moved on. Exams, slow spring mornings, the smell of cut grass drifting through open windows, but each time the fluorescent bulbs flickered, my mind leapt back to his patient smile, like static meeting ground. Now years later, the train keens softly beneath the rain, and I imagine him adult, perhaps taller, though still wrapped in that gentle hush. I see him in a loft lit by monitors, eyes reflecting soft blue pulse. Maybe he plots forgotten satellites, giving them new routes when their orbits wobble. Maybe he translates thunderstorm data into hushed symphonies, sending them across quiet frequencies so far-flung listeners might recognize the architecture of weather and melody. I like to think he's still mapping, not to conquer but to understand, tethering distant signals into a single comprehensible chord. I wonder what he would make of this journey, wheels drumming even time, droplets racing down glass like competing code lines. He would probably smile, note the tempo, then write a gentle algorithm assigning each click a coordinate and each sigh of the transformer a purpose. He believed nothing was random. Every hum, every pause, every flicker belonged to a pattern big enough to hold us all. The train eases into a shallow curve. Cabin lights dim by one quiet notch, the world's simplest semaphore telling minds to drift. The rain, too, slackens, falling now in slow, deliberate commas. Outside, hedgerows fade into charcoal. Distant farmhouses show a single tolerant lamp before night folds them away. Let the memory settle. Feel the wheels translating distance into lullaby, the rails offering steady proof that forward exists. If a stray doubt flickers, imagine that boy adjusting the circuit, smoothing resistance until the tiny diode of worry dims to calm amber. Each breath arrives, gentle, unhurried. Each drop on the pane finds its place in the map. Soon the rhythm will soften further, a metronome set to the pulse of sleep. Eyelids grow heavier, thoughts spool like ribbon into neat, unknotted loops. Trust the quiet cartographer inside you, the part that can listen beyond words, to guide the next steps across darkness. In this moment, the train, the rain, the memory, and your slow, steady breathing all belong to the same design. The final stations of wakefulness slip behind us. Coordinates blur. Patterns smooth. Let the map fold itself away. Let the hum cradle you. And when the cabin grows still, drift with it gently into rest. Have you ever felt a hallway light hesitate as if waiting for permission to glow? The train slides through drenched farmland, wheels murmuring a low, dependable hymn. Rain keeps score on the window, fast taps, slow taps, tiny pauses that feel almost thoughtful. Warm lamplight drapes the cabin in patient gold, and somewhere between one heartbeat and the next I find myself recalling a boy who understood why lights pause, why wires sigh. He never rushed, never raised his voice, never seemed startled by bell or whistle. While the rest of us shuffled backpacks and opinions, he moved in gentle diagonals, taking up less space than shadow yet noticing everything. Teachers marked him present, but it was the machines that recorded him most faithfully. The subtle lift in voltage when he approached a faulty outlet, the clack of a stuck relay freed by his fingertip. One late November afternoon, the library's computers crashed in a single, theatrical blink. Screens went black, fans spun down, and the air filled with confused chatter. He simply leaned closer, listening to the sudden hush as if it were music. Then, with a slow exhale, he tapped 3 keys on the nearest keyboard, blind, precise, and monitors bloomed back to life. Nobody asked how. The moment felt too delicate for questions. During group projects, he preferred the seat nearest the radiator, notebook balanced on his knees. I saw the pages once, rows of slender numerals marching beside tiny constellations of dots. "Signal stars," he whispered when he caught my glance. "If you plot latency on a dark enough night, the delays line up like Orion." I wanted to laugh, but the sincerity in his eyes steadied me into silence. There was a rumor, soft as lint, that he had slipped just once beyond the fence of ordinary networks. Late at night, they said, he brushed against something vast, left a courteous greeting, and backed away before alarms could finish breathing in. Nothing stolen, nothing harmed, only acknowledged. Administration responded with long meetings behind frosted glass. He attended classes the next week, but with a new stillness as though gravity had grown slightly heavier. Spring thawed the snow but not the hush around him. At lunch he unfolded a foil packet of crackers, arranged them in binary on the tray, ate the ones that meant 0 and left the ones that meant 1. Each crumb looked deliberate, almost reverent. When a classmate teased him, he smiled an absent smile and gathered the leftover ones into a napkin, perhaps saving a portion of conversation for later analysis. Then, as cherry blossoms began their brief confetti, his seat went empty. The substitute read his name, paused, then carried on. A pencil remained in the desktop groove, sharpened, ready. Weeks slipped by. The pencil disappeared. My eyes kept drifting to that vacant chair the way a compass drifts toward unseen north. Life, relentless in its scheduling, pressed forward, but a small frequency stayed missing from the room's hum. Now the train rounds a moonlit bend, and I picture him older, though not necessarily taller. Delicacy can be stubborn. Maybe he sits in a quiet studio where servers glow like distant campfires, translating thunderstorms into measurement, coaxing dying satellites to whisper one more coordinate before sleep. Perhaps he still eats crackers in binary, a private ritual for clarity. Or maybe he's wandering city rooftops with a multimeter in his pocket, checking forgotten antennae the way others check on aging relatives. I want to tell him the carriage tonight feels tuned to his key. The transformer's low drone, the rain's syncopated grace, the subtle click when the conductor dims the lights another notch. Everything cooperating, everything admitting it can be gentle. I imagine him nodding, tracing patterns in condensation, murmuring, "Yes, that's the correct frequency, carry on." The countryside outside surrenders to deeper shadow. Hedgerows melt into a single brushstroke of charcoal. Inside, breathing slows, conversations settle into semi-silence. Raindrops grow lazy, spacing themselves like soft ellipses. Even the wheels adopt a quieter cadence, as though aware the story is ready to rest. So let the memory glide back, feather-light, finding its perch somewhere behind the heart. Accept the hush he understood so well. Wires humming busy lullabies, lights hesitating just long enough to feel alive, rain translating distance into rhythm. Breathe in as if each inhale confirms a pattern. Breathe out as if completing a gentle circuit. Soon thought will blur at the edges, names and numbers folding into soft, anonymous code. The train, unwavering, will carry us forward. The night, forgiving, will carry everything else. Close your eyes whenever you're ready. Trust the silent architect, wherever he is, to keep tending the hidden lattice of signals, and allow yourself to drift along his quiet, intricate map towards sleep. Have you ever caught yourself wondering whether the wind keeps score of every secret it carries? The train drifts through rinsed fields, wheels scoring a gentle line through the dark. Rain fingers the window with soft insistence, then slides away, leaving pale trails that vanish almost as soon as I can follow them. Cabin lights glow like muted lanterns, and in their hush, a familiar silhouette floats back. Thin shoulders, thoughtful eyes, pockets lined with half-finished theories. He never hurried. Even when bells rang and corridors erupted, he seemed to move at a tempo only he could hear, somewhere between heartbeat and dial tone. Teachers called him gifted, classmates weird, the air around him though felt simply tuned. I remember watching him linger beneath the eaves after class, palm outstretched, measuring raindrops as though noting their frequency. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled, small, almost private, and said, verifying a rumor the wind told me. His notebooks were a weather system of their own, grids of numbers, margins of delicate sketches, fragments of code curled like vines around stray haiku. Some pages shimmered with equations so light they looked whispered rather than written. During lectures he'd tilt his head, eyes half closed, as if absorbing the room's electricity through the fine bones of his ear. Once, a flickering fluorescent above us stuttered into silence. He merely reached up, tapped the casing, and the light steadied, grateful. Lunch was his solitary ritual. He'd sit by the far window, always that same seat, unpacking a sandwich he rarely finished, studying the sky instead. When clouds gathered, his posture changed. Shoulders lifted, attention sharpened, as though storm fronts spoke in a dialect only he understood. I watched him jot coordinates on his napkin, fold it twice, tuck it into his sleeve. Later I found one of those scraps under a chair, a string of digits spiraling toward a single word, listen. Rumor bloomed like dandelions on warm asphalt. Late-night keyboards, distant servers, a doorway open just wide enough for a curious mind. Nothing damaged, nothing taken, merely a fingerprint on a pane of digital glass. Adults reacted with long sentences and careful eyebrows. He reacted by disappearing further into calm, like a stone settling through deep water. One gray morning his desk stood empty, books gone, names still penciled on the attendance chart. The substitute paused, frowned, then moved on. At first we believed he'd overslept. By week's end we spoke of him in the past tense without quite admitting it. The hallway felt larger, sound carried farther, and when the wind rattled loose window panes, I half expected his voice to answer. Time, efficient and unfeeling, moved ahead. Graduations, obligations, the mild astonishments of adult routine all gathered around me. Yet some nights, when rain levels its steady percussion against glass, memory slips its key into the lock. I see him again, older perhaps, though still unmistakably himself, kneeling beside a rooftop air vent, listening to its hum the way others listen to lullabies. Maybe he's somewhere coastal, charting gusts that roam the cliffs, translating their sighs into code too elegant for ordinary alphabets. What strikes me now is not his brilliance, impressive though it was, but his gentleness with mystery. Where most of us demanded answers, he asked better questions and trusted the atmosphere to reply. Standing here in this softly lit carriage, I wonder what questions I've allowed to go unanswered simply because I rushed them. The train leans into a curve. Cabin lights dim a shade, inviting eyelids to mimic the motion. I rest my forehead against cool glass and count the seconds between distant crossing bells. The rhythm forms a quiet algorithm. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause, that feels oddly familiar, as though he slipped it into the night expressly for anyone still listening. If he could hear this train, I imagine he'd catalog its cadence, map the friction heat along the wheels, note the subtle pitch shift as we crest a gentle rise. He'd say the wind outside isn't random. It's composing, always composing, and the rails merely add harmony. Then he'd turn away to catch a new pattern before it drifted beyond recall. I like to think he's content, that the vast web he once brushed now welcomes him like an old friend. Perhaps he guides stray packets of data home when they lose their route across the dark, or leaves quiet footnotes in weather logs so tomorrow's meteorologist can smile at an anomaly that feels like kindness. Wherever he is, I hope the wind keeps him company, carrying signals only he knows how to read. Rain softens to a whisper, droplets arriving farther apart, like commas easing a sentence toward its close. The hum beneath the floorboards settles, deep and even. Each breath I draw feels a little slower, a little wider, as if the cabin itself is exhaling through me. So let us drift with that breath. Let his memory perch lightly on the sill, neither captured nor lost, simply present, like a timestamp in an endless stream. Here, in the overlap between wheels, rain, and wind, questions loosen, thoughts blur, and the night offers a blanket woven from steady sound. Close your eyes if you wish. The train knows its route, the wind keeps the score, and somewhere, a boy who once measured raindrops is still attuned to every gentle interval. Rest now, and let his quiet wonder guide you past the last waking station into sleep. Have you ever considered that the crackle of an untuned radio might be a lullaby still learning its melody? The train hums beneath us, a slow, patient drone that slides through rain-washed meadows. Each wheel click feels like a metronome set just below a heartbeat. Outside, distant farm lights blur into watercolor, their glow braided with drifting mist. Inside, the carriage breathes in lamplight and exudes a gentle sigh. In that hush, a boy I once almost knew steps back into focus, as clear as the raindrops gathering on the window's edge. He sat at the farthest desk in chemistry, close enough to the equipment to feel the faint tremor of current through old wires. While we measured liquids and followed instructions, he would close one eye and watch the power indicator on the incubator blink. Long, long, short, long, patterns he claimed were messages from the machine's lonely heart. When the teacher noticed his distraction, she'd ask a question. He'd answer perfectly, then fade back into his private listening as though knowledge were an afterthought. Recess found him on the steps outside, cheap handheld radio pressed to his ear. The dial rarely settled on a station. He preferred the liminal hiss, a vast ocean of half-heard signals. He once tilted the radio toward me, inviting me into the chaos, and whispered, "If you wait, you'll hear shape." I waited, heard only crackle, and shrugged. He smiled as though I'd missed a joke he planned to tell the sky instead. Afternoons, the hallway lights hummed with fatigue. He'd pause beneath the noisiest fixture, finger lifted, and mimic the buzz with a whistle so precise the frequency melted into silence. It was a tiny act of kindness, calming a nervous bulb, settling the tension in glass and filament. Few noticed the absence of the flicker. Fewer still noticed him walking away, shoulders a little lighter. Rumor billowed after winter break. A night spent wandering unseen networks, a breadcrumb of neatly written code left like a polite calling card. No vandalism, no theft. Only a quiet curiosity echoed across distant servers. Administrators spoke in hushed tones. Students wove the tale into something mythic. He, meanwhile, arrived each morning unchanged, hair brushing his collar, eyes reflecting a weather map no one else could see. Yet something had shifted. He grew softer, as if carrying a fragile instrument inside his chest. During a fire drill, sirens clamored against the wind, and he stood very still, head tilted, measuring the pitch. Afterward, he scribbled a single sentence on a scrap of graph paper. "All alarms want us to be understood." I found the note tucked into my textbook later that day, the words small, neat, deliberate. Spring rain began to fall in long silver strings. One Thursday, the principal's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing unexpected assembly. By the next morning, his desk sat empty. A lone battery rested where his radio usually lay, a small, shining circle waiting for purpose. The custodian pocketed it without comment. The classroom felt hollow, one frequency missing from its usual chord. Seasons rolled forward as seasons insist. Tests, farewells, adult routines accrued like gentle dust. Still, every so often a flickering street lamp will steady, and I wonder if he's nearby, offering that perfect whistle. Tonight, with the train cradle rocking beneath me, I imagine him older, somewhere coastal, antennas bristling from a modest rooftop, coaxing songs from the gap between channels. Maybe he spends evenings aligning dishes no one else notices, tilting them toward lonely satellites so each can murmur its data without static. Perhaps he records the hum of transformers at dawn, layering them into symphonies that only dawn itself can appreciate. I like to believe he still carries that radio, though the plastic may be cracked and the volume knob worn smooth. He would set it on a windowsill, let sea wind drift through the speaker, and smile when the noise resolves into a faint chord. Noise, he taught me, is never empty. It is distance made audible, awaiting translation. The train eases around a curve. Raindrops gather at the bottom of the pane, swell, release, begin again. The cabin lights dim just enough for outlines to soften. Conversation fades to shuffled breaths and coat zippers settling. It feels as though the whole carriage is listening for the shape inside the static. I rest my palm against the cool glass, feel vibration travel through bone, and close my eyes. The wheels speak in pulses, the rails answer in echoes, the rain fills the pauses with dotted grace notes. If the boy heard this, he'd call it a choir: steel, water, air, each offering its particular tone to the night. Let that thought quiet the restless corners of consciousness. Imagine his gentle whistle smoothing the hum of the fluorescent above your seat. Imagine his radio collecting every stray whisper the wind has carried since morning. Feel how the carriage steadies into near silence, how breath slows, how muscles ease their grip on wakefulness. Soon the static inside the mind thins, revealing the soft music beneath. Follow it the way droplets follow gravity, unhurried, inevitable, kind. The train knows its path, the night uncurls ahead. Somewhere beyond these fields, a young man calibrates a worn antenna, satisfied when the hiss softens into harmony. Trust his patience. Let its echo guide you beyond thought, beyond listening, into sleep.